Greetings and welcome to our webinar entitled From Surviving to Thriving, Church in the Post-Pandemic Culture. I'm John Baxter, President of Nations University, and we're very glad you have joined us for this conversation. We're also grateful for the organizations who've joined with us in supporting this event: the Christian Chronicle, Mission Alive, 21st Century Christian, and several others. All of us share a great interest in helping churches deal with challenging times. And our prayer tonight is that this event helps God's kingdom to grow and the gospel to be seen as the ultimate solution for the challenges our world faces. Let me also offer a special thanks to the over 100 churches who have helped us by describing each of your responses to the pandemic. The information that you've shared informs much of our discussion, and it will also be available at the end of this week on the Nations University website in both an executive summary as well as raw data form, so each of us can better understand how churches across the world have adapted in response to the pandemic. I'm joined by David Shrigley, Nation University's Chief Academic Officer, and Dr. Shrigley will now introduce the panel that will help us respond to questions at the end of the webinar.
John, it's great to be participating in this event tonight. Over the last month, I've had a great time speaking with many of the men and women who will be serving as our panelists. Their insights and experiences are invaluable for churches wrestling with this pandemic. I'm just going to introduce who they are and we'll see them later. And I'm going to start with Keith Castleman. Keith is the pulpit minister at Cornerstone Church of Christ in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Next, we have Tim and Tammy Genry, who work together in Birmingham, Alabama at a church plant of the Landmark Church of Christ. Following them are Kenneth Pinkley and Stephen Charleboy, who serve as the youth minister and the family minister at the Weber Road Church of Christ in Corpus Christi, Texas. From the Harpeth Hills Church of Christ in Nashville, Tennessee, we have Jason Thompson, who serves as one of the ministers there. And finally, from Gresham, Oregon, we are joined tonight by Matt Wojcik, who is the preaching minister at the Metro Church of Christ. I cannot say enough how much we appreciate all that you guys have done, taking the time to help us with the interviews, being here tonight to answer questions. And we're looking forward to seeing and speaking with you guys all again in about an hour or so. So see y'all then. As we move into the first portion of this webinar, you guys that are attending will have the opportunity to send questions to our panelists using the Q&A box on the bottom of your Zoom screen. There's also a chat feature, but we're not using that tonight. It will not be monitored. So please, if you have questions, submit them directly to the Q&A box, and we will work on answering those questions at the end of this evening.
Great. Thank you, David, for those introductions. We're going to start by talking about leadership. And for our discussion here, that group includes both ministers as well as elders or shepherds. Our survey indicates the vast majority of our eldership and ministry teams continued the practice of meeting throughout the pandemic. Over 40% found a way to meet regularly in person with or without face masks and social distancing. But of those not able to meet in person, many reported using Zoom meetings or other video conferencing methods to stay connected and address needs. A very small percentage reported that meetings they met only when needed, with only those necessary, or they used email, text, and phone conferencing to address issues. And all of this underscores a key best practice that we strongly recommend: find a way to meet regularly during challenging times, whether it's in person or using technology. Those who are not able to do this report that tensions build due to distance, and there's a lack of communication, and both leaders and members suffer from not knowing what's going on. In terms of outreach to and awareness of members, our survey showed that over 75% of churches and their leaders have used email and social media to stay connected with members. The majority of churches use multiple types of media and or email to do this. A small percentage either began or added additional social media approaches to stay connected in response to the pandemic. And typically, we found that smaller congregations reported using fewer types of social media, less complex approaches to staying connected than larger churches did. In shepherding the flock, over 1/3 of church leadership teams reported continuing to meet with members in their homes, either with or without masks and social distancing. And some leadership teams acknowledge that in-person meetings occurred less often due to concern about the risk status of the members or ministers or shepherds that resulted from age or other health issues. In spite of this, almost all leadership teams reported staying connected with members either in person or using phone calls, texts, and emails. In the videos you're about to see, please note that while we worked to make the volume of the videos as consistent as we could, your own adjustment of volume may still be helpful. In our first video, you'll hear about how crisis serves as an accelerant for changing the way that we serve others. Another video segment will focus on the close connection between ministers and elders as transitions in church outreach occur. And the remainder of the video focuses on how church leaders care for the flock as well as for each other during this challenging time.
So a crisis is an accelerator. And when a crisis occurs, you know, there are challenges that are immediately right in front of you that you've got to deal with, but you've also got to recognize that you're going to have to make some changes that, let's just be frank, you probably wouldn't have even thought about doing when things were normal or back when things were normal. And there are also things that you think, you know, we'd like to try that, but you didn't have the courage to do it because things were going so well. Well, when you're in a crisis, that's an opportunity to make some changes, and things can move really, really quickly. From an eldership and a minister's partnership perspective, you know, we had immediately, when this occurred, we had to respond and basically anticipate some things that may or may not occur. So for example, we sat down and said, you know what, we need to be prepared to deal with people who get impacted by COVID. From a health perspective, we had to deal with people that may lose their job over COVID. We had to be prepared for people who were already health compromised, who may be homebound, who were now for sure going to be homebound. And we had to be in a position to respond to those groups of people, I would think, as an immediate priority. And so we put in place systems to address those people. And then we said, okay, we've also got to be ready to communicate with the congregation at large. And so we had a system of ministry system, or a shepherding, I would call it a shepherding model, that we call Barnabas. And it was a way that we were able to keep in touch with membership. But even all of those things still feel quite a bit inadequate, because there's so many things that have impacted us in terms of being separated. And so we've had to there's a lot of trial and error that have gone on in this process.
I think we were caught off guard just like every other church was when this happened. But I think one of the benefits that we had here is with our leadership and the ministry team. The question wasn't if we should meet, but how do we figure this out? And I think that mindset kind of drove us to finding a solution. And so we started off the first week. I think we just uploaded a sermon and we uploaded some song slides for people to look at and sing with their families by themselves. And then we kept looking for better ways to connect and better ways to get together. And so we ended up producing online services for the first few weeks, but we wanted to find a way to get our church body together in a way that was safe and followed the restrictions that we had up here. And at that time, we couldn't meet in groups larger than 10 here in Oregon. And so getting together was very difficult, even in small groups. So I had heard about FM transmitters. I'd seen an article somewhere where a church found an FM transmitter and they were parking outside and doing a service. And I thought, well, there's really no good reason we can't do that. And so I started doing some online searches, and I found the transmitters and I found how to do it. And we had a discussion with our leadership. One of the benefits is that we meet with our elders every week, even before all this. And so we have a habit of good, regular communication that doesn't require a big delay. And so we were able to meet and say, hey, let's do this. And the eldership was on board. They said, hey, if there's a way we can get together that's safe and allows us to assemble, let's do that. And so So we did, and it was a struggle. It wasn't easy. I wasn't trained to do this. It took a lot of Google searches and a lot of YouTube videos to figure out how to produce our online services. And once we had that down, we decided we were going live, and so it was starting all over again with figuring out how to do that.
We've had to also be aware of how do we care for each other. I mean, this has been a stressful time for elders and for ministers navigating this, and it's a good time to work on that relationship. It's a good time to remind each other how God's gifted the elder or the minister, the good that God's doing through them. And Apostle Paul calls us to a ministry of encouragement, and we've tried to encourage each other on this journey, and yet encourage each other, but still be centered in that our job, our responsibilities to advancing the gospel, not try to make Randy feel better about Randy or Jason feel better about Jason. How do we encourage each other, but yet keep on moving forward? One of the things that I'm passionate about right now is that the world is changing so rapidly, and if the church is longing to go back to something that used to be, we're going to see the whole world pass us by. There's going to be an even larger disconnect between the world and the church. So how do we kind of get out of the whining mode? Because there's been plenty to whine about during this year. So how do we get out of the whining mode and just hoping and praying they will go back to normal? And how do we lead people to Jesus Christ? How do we be the church that's on the move, not just responding?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned something that I have said for years, and that is, who shepherds the shepherds and the ministers? And this has been a stressful time. People who were hired to be the ministry of this are all of a sudden realizing, you know what? I need to repurpose and be the ministry over this. That's a stressful thing for somebody in a job who thinks they're doing one thing one day, and all of a sudden 30 days later, their job description changed, and they're having to do things that are totally different that they didn't even think about 6 weeks before. That's stressful for people. So we have to be conscious of how each other are doing, make sure our mental and spiritual health is good. So I feel strongly about that, and always have, that we have to shepherd not just the flock, but shepherd the shepherds and the ministers. I mentioned a minute ago about our Barnabas groups. So, Barnabas groups, we started those 3 or 4 years ago. They've had their strengths, they've had their weaknesses, but I think it has really served a good purpose during this pandemic, because it's a way that we have broken the congregation down based on social networks to shepherd people. So we've used those to maintain person-to-person contact as best we could. We've encouraged elders to have communication on a regular basis with their Barnabas groups. We as an eldership do a weekly letter to the congregation that's put out on email. So those are the ways that we are doing it on a broad scale. I think on an individual basis, unfortunately, it's some crisis management, because it's when a crisis happens that we, are able to come in. And then even there, it's not like we're free to go and visit someone in the hospital or even someone who's sick. You're doing so many things remotely. It's like yesterday at the house church, someone mentioned that one of our members had been tested positive for COVID. Well, I think in talking to her husband yesterday afternoon, I think their phone was ringing off the hook yesterday afternoon, and he said, did you send pizza to our house? And I'm like, no. He said, well, we just got a pizza delivered, and I don't know who sent it. And then he said somebody else had been to Cool Cafe and grabbed a meal and brought it and put it on our front porch. That to me is church, and unfortunately that's not scripted anywhere. And so you're seeing smaller groups address those needs. The issue comes for the people who maybe aren't as engaged.
We appreciate those comments by the leadership there at Harpeth Hills and Matthew, and of course a lot of others who have contributed to that discussion as we've tried to work through and determine the best practices revolving around this pandemic. We can also see some similar trends in responses to our survey questions regarding worship. Some live, some streamed, or some recorded, some of them quite surprising. Prior to the pandemic, only 21% of the churches in the survey were live streaming their worship service. Now that number is 44%, with more planning on adding live streaming later. Most significant increase came in medium-sized churches, 100 to 350. So don't have to be a big church to do this, right? The most significant increase was by two-thirds of medium-sized churches added live stream during the pandemic. Put that in a little different perspective, 11% of these medium-sized churches live streamed before the pandemic. Now, 65% are doing so. Even churches of less than 100 went from 13% live streaming to 48%. As we'll see in a later video interview with Keith, this change, not just found in churches of Christ, will reshape the way people visit churches in the future. Similar statistics were found for recorded services. Prior to the pandemic, 22% of churches were recording a worship service and making it available online later. During the pandemic, that percentage increased to 56%. Small churches went from 20% to 50%. Again, medium churches from 12% to 62%. And then larger churches even increased from 43% to 71%. Of course, not everything was online. About 11% of our respondents met outside in chairs at church. 5% had a drive-in worship. Matthew mentioned that and about how they were going to do it, and he'll talk more about it. Meeting in a parking lot, having cars pulling in there and having a service going on from there. And of course, another 5% met in public facilities like parks and libraries and those kinds of things. In other words, if there was a will, there was a way. For those who met outside, some equipment was needed. About 19% used portable equipment, portable PA systems, but another 9% used the internet over the phone, and some even used FM transmitters, which is exactly what Matt did there. Cars pulled up, they used an FM transmitter and were able to hear the sermon right over the radio. There was a lot going on, and I think that that's really important for us to realize that people could do stuff with just a little bit of equipment. Some people went out and bought video recording and editing software, Livewire, and a few others, and we'll have those listed on our print material after this seminar is over in a few days. Subscriptions to streaming services, microphones. A lot of people had to buy microphones that were compatible with their iPhones or other phone systems or were Bluetooth capable. So some things had to be bought. But only a few people actually bought cameras because most people found that their phones, their tablets, those kinds of mobile devices were more than sufficient. But these numbers are great and it's all interesting, but I think it's our panelists that provide the best insights into these numbers. You'll hear about how the crisis has helped identify weaknesses in many of our congregations and how some churches have taken these weaknesses as challenges and worked to overcome them.
You brought up our digital presence. You know, a crisis highlights your weaknesses. You know, things that may have been there all along, but because we were doing really well, our membership was up, had a great budget, we just don't mess with the good thing. Well, it's like the old NFL coach and legendary sports broadcaster John Madden used to say, winning is a great deodorant. And it's true, because when things get a little bit awry, then your weaknesses become apparent. And I think one of those, a good example of that, is our digital presence. We really hadn't focused on that at all. And all of a sudden, this happened. And it was a glaring weakness that we are still struggling with. How do we address that, and how do we address it well?
Started with a camera down on the floor. It was just an old SE5 camera out of my pocket, and we recorded it with the ambient sound in the room. It was usable. It was rough. It was kind of crude, but it got the job done. And we streamed that out live via Facebook. We chose Facebook simply because so much of the church is already on Facebook. We already had a Facebook page, and we like the interaction to allowing people to comment on our live feed as we talk. And so even people who are in church are commenting on what's being done in the sermon or what's being sung with those who are online. It gives us a little bit of connectivity between the two. The next week, as that was the first week, and the next week, the governor said that we couldn't meet in the church. So the next week that we met, we knew that the sound was an issue. So we strung cables, XLR cables, out of the back booth that's up above the auditorium, all the way across the floor, converted them from XLR into a lightning cable, plugged those into the back of an iPhone, and we had good sound and medium quality video. Then somewhere along the way, that phone started having issues, and so we upgraded to the SE 2020 iPhone. And keep in mind the whole time that we're trying not to spend any money. So we're utilizing phones and iOS devices, Apple devices that we already own. And so we got the sound right. We got the video looking good just with those two changes. But all we had was a face on. We had to put a camera, or we had to put a monitor in front of the camera, because we had nothing in between the camera and the stream out to be able to scroll words or to be able to show words. So we literally put that TV screen in front of the camera with the praise team around that TV, so people could read the words and sing along with this, with one view. Then the governor allowed us to bring people back in. So we found some cables, some old buried cables underneath the stage that allowed us to rip up those XLR cables that were across the floor of the auditorium and come straight out of the stage and use those for the audio. So that cleaned us up a lot and got the auditorium ready for people to come back in. And so we started a mixed presentation where 50% of my congregation is here and 50% is online. And so we ran that way for about a month. And we recognized that our production quality just wasn't where it needs to be. People were still complaining, especially people that watched on small devices, were still complaining that they couldn't see the words. We knew that was an issue. So we looked around and we found some software called Switcher Studio. And Switcher Studio allows you to take a Apple iOS device, whether it's an iPod, iPhone, or a iPad, and use the camera for it to wirelessly come into a broadcast system. And so now we can run multi-views. We have 3 cameras running at a time. We can, through Switcher software, we can select any of the camera views. We can run 2 camera views at once. We have 2 computers set up, one with just lyrics because of the licensing. It has no notes on it. So we run that for the people to sing along with. In-house, we have a slideshow that's running the full notes and the paperless hymnal for those inside. And the software allows you to pull in a PowerPoint presentation, and all this is wireless. So we don't have to have wires running all over the front of the auditorium. And it allows you to take all that and bring it into one interface on an iPad and literally just touch whatever you want to feed out. So if you want to feed out the center screen and the PowerPoint so people can sing along, or if you want to just go with a solo page, you can have whatever camera solo. Really gives you a whole lot of flexibility. It also gives you the ability to give yourself some branding across the bottom of, they call those bottom thirds, and it allows you to tell whoever is watching what the church is, contact info, information like that. And that really has helped us go to a high level of professional quality production without the cost. Really, the only cost that we endured was the cost of an iPad and the cost of the Switcher Studio software, which is $39 a month. So for $39 a month, and I don't know, $300 for the iPad, we were able to massage what we had and get to the level of production that we're at now. We have some people who are resistant against the word of production, but really we're putting a production on. I'm resistant to the word entertainment, but I believe that if we're going to do a good job online, that we have to see it as a production, and we have to look at that production from the moment I say good morning church to the last amen. It should all be well thought out, well planned, and to do anything less makes it look a little bit like a lack of care or a lack of importance was given, and we never want to come across that way, especially to a non-believer. A lack of professionalism sometimes in our society comes across as a lack of care or a lack of commitment to something, and we don't ever want to come across that way.
And to your point earlier about how do we all do this together, right now, if I had to give any encouragement to Harpeth Hills, Randy, it would be to live in this tension of how do we stay united, but how do we keep moving forward? And that's just going to be a tension for any church. We're going to have to keep moving forward, and it's going to be a tension point for leadership in the church to go, whoa, we used to have services at these 2 times, and now we're going to be having services at these 4 times, plus online, plus at a house church.
And that to me is a really cool thing, because you know what? We may have thought about doing these micro churches around Williamson County for a long time, but may have never pulled the trigger.
That's right.
And now we're saying, you know what? We kind of used an opportunity to do it.
Next, we're going to turn to the topic of education and also to children's and youth programs. Several churches surveyed indicated that they have not made a priority of providing adult Bible classes during the pandemic. In the churches where adult Bible classes have continued, most have been recorded and the video has been posted online or to the church website for members to be able to access. Of those churches who recorded a single person simply speaking, over half do not plan to continue that practice and instead are telling us that they're thinking of moving to recorded Zoom studies. The number of churches across the board offering Zoom classes before the pandemic was about 10 to 12%. And during the pandemic, that increased to around 50%, with 62% of large churches offering Zoom classes. The percentage of churches offering recorded Bible class lessons doubled for all size churches, but quadrupled for the medium-sized ones from a percentage of 8% up to 38%. 62% of our larger churches record their Bible classes, and the vast majority plan to continue that offering. In the video that you'll see next, Tammy and Tim Gentry at the Landmark Church in Birmingham, Alabama, describe a creative approach using Zoom that allows the sermon content to be discussed in smaller breakouts, online meeting rooms that are facilitated by Bible study leaders. And that video will be followed by a video with Matthew McIntyre, who is the CEO of 21st Century Christian, who's going to describe the Hybrid Guide to Sunday School, which is a planning resource that churches can download for free to help think through Bible study and Sunday school education. Then he'll discuss that 21st Century has shifted to providing Bible class materials in both print and digital formats.
Yeah, it actually worked to our benefit a great deal, because had we just been watching the sermons that we typically have by video, there would have been no personal interaction with our members. And so by doing it through, what we did through Zoom is Tim has trained other people to facilitate those Discovery Bible studies. And so we would do parts of our worship time as a whole group, but then when we would start our lessons, he would divide people into different rooms, and he had a leader in each room, and we would do our whole Discovery Bible study with a small group where everybody was participating and sharing, and it provided a way to have connection with our people. And it was very, conversational and back and forth and that kind of thing. And so it really ended up being a special time.
A couple of things we've done. We created what we call a hybrid guide to Sunday school. And so it's a resource for different age groups, and we offer it free online. But here are some ways to get children involved, and here's how you can think about getting children involved, whatever your situation at those different age groups, whether you're meeting in person, whether you are having some type of virtual Sunday school, or some combination of the two, where you've got a few people meeting in person and a few meeting remotely. Initially, I think what we had was we would still get the Sunday school, the curriculum materials out, and then you would have a children's deacon or teachers or children's ministers preparing the materials and sending them home to children, and they would either study it there with their parents, maybe do a pre-recorded class that parents would study at home. Sometimes there'd be a drive-through, you pick up your materials. The other thing we did for our Immerse and Lifelinks curricula were we digitized everything. We went all digital.
Okay.
So we still have, everything is still
Both in print as well as in digital image format.
exactly.
For children and youth, the pandemic has caused a great deal of change. Approximately 1/3 of churches reported their children and youth programs had been canceled throughout the pandemic. Only 14% of churches were able to maintain indoor meetings of children and youth, and some limiting those to only 10 persons present. A number of churches have hosted outdoor meetings for children and youth to allow larger numbers to be present while keeping appropriate distance. About 1/3 of the churches reported using social media such as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp, and others to allow interaction with youth. And for those teaching children and youth online, about 1/3 have used material available from the internet, and nearly half have provided support materials, whether it's through the mail, pickup at the church building, or via the church website, or as an email attachment. A number of churches have also recognized the important principle of providing interactivity through games or Zoom activities for children and youth. We all recognize that children have less ability than adults to stay focused for a 30-minute lesson that has little to no interaction. And so it's critically important that when we use high tech, we also find ways to maintain high touch so that children and youth, and frankly all church members, continue to feel connected to teachers and ministers, elders, and each other. In the next videos, you'll hear multiple ideas for ways to engage with children and youth. The second video describes challenges and solutions faced by a larger church that had to replace classes in summer camp and vacation Bible school with alternate solutions to help children continue to grow in their faith. That church also has emphasized equipping parents to share their own faith with their children. The third video segment speaks to creativity around how to present Vacation Bible School in a distance format. And the fourth video shares observations about the philosophy behind change. Events aren't the goal, building faith is. And it also speaks as to how the ministry team members have adjusted their roles to meet new needs in the congregation.
To people from churches all over the country, and so we have seen the complete spectrum.
So what unique changes have happened, let's say, for example, in children's education, everything from Sunday school for children all the way to Vacation Bible School?
Yeah, with Sunday school for children, and that's definitely one of the areas that concerns me the most, frankly. I think it has been the most difficult for churches to get a handle on how do we keep the children engaged. With adults, it can be easier to have a video and you record your lesson for the evening, and then we get around and watch it for 30 minutes or 40 minutes or whatever that is. That's not as easy with children. Anybody who has ever taught children knows keeping them engaged and focused on you is a challenge. And it's what makes great teachers so great, because those children are so important. And so not having the bi-directional communication, not having that in-person engagement has been really tough.
So it's important to us as adults to be able to have an exchange, but it's even more important for children to be able to have that exchange?
I think it is, because one, they need to know that the person who's teaching me has some care for me and some concern for me, and understand that, which we don't get as well from just watching a video. But we do get it, I mean, in those Zoom calls, in the FaceTime calls, or however we're doing that. You can get it by telephone calls, and certainly in person. So some of the things we hear churches doing all over the place, and one advantage of the nicer weather in a lot of places has been some are having outdoor Sunday school classes, and for middle school age children and up, it's been really easy to have, okay, we're going to sit around a big circle where we think it's a little safer to be outside, but still in person, and have those Sunday school classes outside, even though they may be different or at different times. It may not be 8 in the morning, it may be 4:30 in the afternoon.
Sure.
For the children, it's been all sorts of things. It's been the Zoom calls of a teacher trying to put everybody on a iPad or a laptop and getting together and still talking to each other. It's also been new volunteers that might get found that maybe weren't actually engaged in the children's program, but are willing to say, hey, I'll talk to a child, and it may be a phone call. And they've both got the material in front of them and say, hey, let's talk about the story of Joseph and how God was working in his life to protect him, or let's talk about what Jesus was doing here, and just how are you, by the way? Because we get so few real interactions by telephone anymore either, and children really enjoy that. Same for when they get a letter or a card from a teacher or somebody who cares about them.
So as of right now, we have not had any children's ministry traditional Sunday school classes. Starting off, our children's ministry did an incredible job of giving through video and through resourcing, through email, different teaching guides for parents, ways to lead your children at home. And I remember my kids at home, every month the kids are memorizing a different scripture, and they've got them on Instagram, all of these kids with learning different scriptures. And it's funny hearing my 3-year-old trying to quote scripture, but she does a great job. And But that's what, and it's that, and them seeing their friends do the same, it encourages them to, impress the Word of God on their heart. And doing things like a drive-through VBS where cars would line up. We couldn't, have VBS in this room, but cars would line up around our church building with different stations and going through one story of the Bible and expressing it in different ways so that our children would really grab onto these incredible narratives in the Old Testament. They had backyard Bible studies where they would have different neighborhoods in Nashville, have families host children, not just children of our church, but children in the neighborhood, to have times to learn about God's Word in a way different environment. So they've been equipping in ways that children's ministry has been so structured around Sunday school. Like Sunday school has been our model for years and years, and again, they're learning the heart of why they're doing children's ministry. It's for these children. It's for these parents. To teach the gospel, to teach the core essential truths of our faith to these children.
And I think our children's ministry has been less event driven, less about a Sunday school class, but right now, how do we equip mom and dad to pass along the faith? And we've always wanted to do that. Again, why did you get into ministry?
Right.
Children's ministers didn't get into ministry to entertain children. They wanted there to be life change.
At the time when it was, okay, decision, if we're going to get anything done, let's just do it digital and let's start planning. So because of that time crunch, our whole focus was on getting teachers in here to record lessons. He and I, working on the skits and starting to edit all the different videos. So thankfully, Denise had approached me on the one element that we do every year in VBS of having the kids do crafts.
Right.
So she said, can I put together a packet that kids or families can either come to the building and pick up, or what I ended up doing is just mailing them out regardless anyway. Because there was a lot of people that started to watch more after VBS, I think. Because they had that extra element of there was the packet that they could engage with, plus the videos that they were able to watch and kind of interact with as well. So yeah, the VBS packets, that was a definite big increase in how VBS was able to be pulled off.
So y'all pre-recorded all of your VBS segments. Did you release them one part each night,
right,
just like it'd be a regular VBS? Okay, and then they had the kids to go along with that video as they're watching it.
And Denise had actually recorded a short video of how to do each craft. Pull day one out of your packet, and this is the craft that you're going to do, and showing them how to do it. So yeah, I still remember, my kids sitting in front of the TV, with popsicle sticks and yarn and doing different crafts, and we're, as parents, trying to keep the lesson relatable. Oh, you're making the wall of Jericho. And so how did that relate from the whole lesson, the skit, the craft, pulling it all together? One thing that we always kept trying to encourage, even outside of the whole digital medium, was how much more trying to get the parents and family to discuss things that we put out there. As we put a video out there, hopefully the parents and kids, they discuss it. Just like any Bible lesson that they would do here, discuss it with your family at home. So that was a lot of the aim as well, is to try to increase the family discussion too. Because if you're not coming in for service, it should be starting in the home regardless, but when you're not around the congregation, people are fallible and they tend to slip a little bit. So trying to encourage each other and put a lot on the family unit to keep things up.
I think that's a good point that I don't think I had really considered until you said it, is
we go to church and our kids go to Bible hour, they go to their Bible class, and then we get home or you go to lunch and you talk a little bit about, hey, what did you study? What did y'all talk about today in Bible class? And they give you some broadly generic answer about
Jesus.
Jesus, Moses, David and Goliath, and that usually covers everything. But when the parents can't actually go and view the video, maybe not even at the same time, before, after, but have an opportunity to do that, the conversation can become much more in depth. And for parents who struggle with having even a home devotional, it's like, okay, let's go sit down and we're going to watch,
Big
VBS
point on.
Yeah, and so the parents become more comfortable with it, and then maybe as it phases out, then they're like, well, we've been doing this all along, so maybe they can continue that with a little bit more confidence. And but I do think mentioning that they
really have appreciated, I think, one of our youth ministers, Hayden Harris, to be part of this conversation that NationsUniversity, Christian Chronicle, and some other groups are putting on. But our children's ministry and our youth ministry never stopped doing ministry. And they just started reframing. They started reconditioning. Those two ministries knew, hey, our job is to help young people and their families grow closer to Jesus. So how do we do that in new, fresh ways? And how do we not let anything be a ceiling for us? And I don't think children's ministry or youth ministry ever stopped at Hartman Hills Church.
The thing I love about that is, I alluded to it a minute ago. Hayden, for example, he was hired as a youth minister, and he knew how to do that because he had done it before. Before he came here. Well, all of a sudden, doing youth ministry in March and April was very different from youth ministry in January and February. And you thought about, okay, well, what about camp? What are we going to do with camp? What about vacation Bible school? What do we do with that? You've got all of these events that are a big part of our ministry here in children's and youth. And we've seen those ministers make incredibly creative things that are, outside the box, that have just been ultra successful.
They had to challenge themselves to make sure that the events were not the end result. They were just means to change lives. And so those ministries took a whiteboard and just totally cleaned it off and said, how do we change lives? How are we part of ushering the kingdom of God into the presence of our families, to our children, our teens, and their parents? And so we saw really creativity happen in those two areas.
You may have noticed in these interviews that there is a trend developing. The church is experiencing somewhat of an outward push where more and more opportunities to teach and engage adults and children now exist. It's as if the church is experiencing a digital diaspora. It's kind of like, okay, we're spreading out. We're no longer doing everything in our building. So unlike the first century diaspora, no one is moving physically, but many are moving online. So evangelistic efforts might seem to be increasing, but we actually saw a decrease in evangelistic efforts during this pandemic by around 33%. And that's in almost every category except two. The use of social media to reach out as an outreach tool actually increased by about 22.5%. Obviously, that's because that's all there was. But that became more used. And so did online Bible study programs by churches. They used World Bible School and literature that they could send to people on email, those kinds of studies. Those even increased by 12%. Like the first century dispersion, the church has found ways to take advantage of the new space that we're occupying. And that space isn't physical, but it's in the virtual world. And we're going to see in the following interviews how this outward push is creating those evangelistic opportunities in places like parks, online, and some even at the church building. So in the final interview in this next section, Keith is going to offer some real important insights about the future of the church in this post-pandemic culture?
So as you think of things like evangelism and outreach in the community, benevolence programs, what are the themes that you're hearing, and what do you encourage churches to consider in looking at that?
And I know outreach is one of those things that the churches worry about. Is that getting left behind? Because if we're not all meeting in the building, how do we still bring people in? I think at the same time, it may have created some new opportunities in that we've talked to a lot of congregations who are meeting in smaller groups where maybe everybody can't meet at the building, but 9 or 10 or 18, depending on how you've got it structured, or meeting in someone's home in maybe looking even more like first century, except we're streaming the lesson at the same time. But it's
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say sometimes it's easier, and we've talked to people who've been meeting in more house church styles, or where they're meeting in those smaller groups. It may be less intimidating to invite somebody. Hey, I know you're not a part of a congregation anywhere, but you want to come over to our house and just meet with a few of these friendly people. And sometimes that's less intimidating than inviting someone to the building.
Yep. So we are able, in a sense, to even do friendship evangelism in a more effective way because of the pandemic in some cases.
Part of our journey, we transitioned back 6 weeks in. We started meeting at a park, and at that time we were very much, everybody had a face mask, and it was still a little uncomfortable with that. We didn't hug, but we at least got to see each other, and that was neat. And we still to this day worship in a pavilion next to beach volleyball courts, a track, and a giant field, and a park, and a very well-used park. And so the exciting part of that has been our singing has brought in visitors that, being outdoors and not having walls, that we could have never brought in any other way. As a matter of fact, we were just, before this, I was texting with the lady who just walked in, and she heard the singing and she was timid. And when the singing's over, we break into our Discovery Bible study groups, and she was timid about joining, but she tried it and sat through it. And then she, just had a ton of questions trying to figure out who we were and why we were meeting like this. But she has still been a part. And last week she texted us and asked, how can I start giving to this church?
Park, and there was a husband and wife sitting near the pavilion facing out towards an open field. And when we started singing, they turned their chairs around and moved closer, and then ultimately sat in one of our small group studies. And they just enjoyed it so much. And they said, thank you so much for inviting us into your group today.
If you were to think about what the church, not even just Weber, if there had been no digital capacity whatsoever, what would the church have been like?
In these last 6 months?
Exactly.
Yes, yeah.
So it definitely hits a niche of people who cannot come, to services. We've had people trying to join the Facebook page that, are friends of friends of friends. So the evangelistic, I don't know, is virality a word in this context? How much stuff can start to spread digitally it's a medium that we would be pretty insane to not utilize anymore. So to answer the question, is it something that I would expect us to continue to use? Definitely. We have actually talked about getting the youth group involved, getting the little kids involved in something that they've seen make, helping them create stuff. the more that they can get involved in an evangelistic process. Isn't that the whole point anyway?
Right. It is. As Stephen, as you said, it's a great evangelistic tool. And how great is it if you can get the kids to be involved in their own evangelistic tool? You can imagine how many kids will go out and say, hey, go check me out on YouTube. You know, I did this video at church. Y'all go check me out. Like, you know, so not only can the church use it, but you can teach them to use it as well.
It's the example you just gave is literally my daughter. She was involved in, you know, a couple of them, and her 7-year-old friend. Look at this video I did. Yeah, it's that exact example of they're excited about something, and the message is still there.
Right.
The concept, the underlying application, the spiritual message is there, and they're sharing it excitedly.
And so the question came up as to whether or not we should continue our Saturday breakfast, which has been going on for about 8 or 10 years now. Every Saturday we offer a free breakfast to the community. They come in and they sit inside, they have breakfast, and we have volunteers that go and talk to the people, try to make connections, even share the gospel. We've done classes at different times and offered those types of things. But when we couldn't meet inside anymore, we thought, well, are we going to be able to do this? And then we also have a food pantry where we give out food every day of the week, every day except for Sunday. I mean, we don't turn people away on Sunday if they show up to services, but it's not a scheduled open time. So we thought, well, can we do this? And in talking with there's community leaders in the area that connect with the nonprofit organizations and the food pantries, and discussing it with them, they said, hey, not only is it okay, but we want you to, we're asking you guys not to close, because if you guys stop feeding the community and those who are in need and they become malnourished, they're only more susceptible to this virus. And so they gave us some guidelines to follow. And so what we did is our Saturday breakfast became a to-go meal where we shared the meal with them. They came up to a window. The meal was given to them through the window, along with some information about our services and you know, some pamphlets and other things as on a spiritual nature, right? And then our food pantry was done the same way, where people could come and to the window. So we communicated that with the community liaison that lets people know where they can come for food. As well as we even put out videos on our social media, which got some attention from the community. We actually had people we had never met, never been part of our congregation, had came, and we had a couple of people come and just give us $500. They said, hey, we like that you're still serving and helping people. Here's $500 toward what we're finding more ways to connect digitally, because one of the other fruits of this is we've had members of our community hear our stuff or see our videos, and we've had our members share videos with people they've invited to service that wouldn't come. So now they can just share our service videos. And we've actually baptized several people through that avenue, just because we have an online presence and we're producing this. It's reached people. When we look at the analytics, I mean, it's reached people all over the world.
Techniques and the processes that y'all put in place, y'all, you know, all these developments, there's the word I'm looking for. What percentage of all these developments that y'all put in place over the last 6 months do you expect to continue moving forward? I mean, between the YouTube channels and Facebook and I mean, all these things that you're doing, all where?
David, I think that we're going to continue to do this even after COVID. The auditorium has moved. People used to come into your auditorium to get a feel of your church, to get an idea of the culture of your church, the character of your church. That's now moved to online. It used to be on your website, but during COVID, it's even gone really away from your personal websites into people watching your worship before they come and visit you. So now the atrium of the church has kind of moved online, and people who are looking for a church and looking for spirituality in their life. I think now they're tuning into the online services. They're making their decisions there on what churches they're going to visit, and does that church look like a church that they could be comfortable at? And then we see them coming in and visiting with us. And I've already seen this true with at least three different couples or singles, different sets since we started this. They find us online, they watch a service or two online before they ever make a decision to come visit you. And so we're different, and we have a unique culture that no other church of Christ around us has. And so we see this as a great opportunity for people to feel comfortable, and we use it as an evangelistic tool, and I don't really think we'll ever stop.
I think
how's that for a long answer to a short question?
I wanted 2 words, and the answer's 100%. Preachers, man, what do you do with them?
I don't know.
I really like your point, though, because there's a lot of studies out there, Barna, Pew, and all that, saying that all this digital broadcasting and stuff is opening a back door for people to leave the church and never return. They're throwing out numbers like 30% will never return to church. But you're saying the exact, not that that's not true, but you're also saying that it also opens the front door and may in fact be your new front door, where people are entering our churches by first seeing if the church really has something to offer. And the more we offer in these online services, the better they are professionally and content-wise, the more opportunities we're going to have to tell people, look, there's something missing in your life and you can get that here. But to do that, we're going to have to show them our best face. This is really who the church is. And if you shortchange that experience, then you're very likely going to you're going to close that door and almost slam it in their face, in a sense, like, oh, you want to see what we do? No way. And then the door closes and we never see them again. But like you said, you're also being very honest, because what people see online is your live service. And if they walk in, they're going to be, again, familiar, using your earlier term, and already somewhat connected.
Well, David, it's been stimulating to hear some great ideas from so many church leaders, both in responding to the survey as well as in the videos that we've just watched. And as we think about key takeaways, one of mine is that our churches are adapting, and many have used new forms of communication, but the same message about the gospel remains core. And so while our churches are making sure that evangelism is occurring, the gospel is presented, members are equipped, and our children and members are growing in faith, they're doing it regardless of the formats or methods. And it's great to see that. I think for me, a key takeaway is new form, but same message.
I think you're spot on. When you say the forms have changed, it reminds me of something else in which the form has changed, but the heart is still the same. In today's digital world, we hear the phrase high tech a lot. I think one of my takeaways is that churches can, even on a shoestring budget, take advantage of some great tech and great technology. And contrary to the old view that high tech is low touch, we've also seen how high tech can lead to high touch. No, I realize it's not exactly the same. I get it. But when the alternative is no touch at all, then we've got to do our best to be both high tech and high touch. And I think that's possible. But even saying that, I think we need to be careful about rushing too quickly into technology and leaving people behind. That was brought up several times. And I'm not just talking about the older generation. We sometimes relegate that problem to them. But there are plenty of people with limited resources that don't always have the most up-to-date software or the most up-to-date version on their phone, or even enough data on their phone or minutes on their phone. They may not even have a phone at all. Mm-hmm. But if we really work hard and make every effort to stay connected, we can be successful. And if I might, I want to show one more little clip from what Matthew had to say about this need not to leave people behind.
What I've learned is that the members are willing to help. They want to be a part of it. But at the same time, it's important that you guide not only the process, you need to guide the hearts and the attitudes of the people. As you bring them together, we have to constantly remind people of what's most important, because this doesn't feel like church used to feel. And people feel like, hey, this is different. Hey, this is not what it used to be. And that's true. But if we get stuck in what it used to be, we can't move forward to what it can be. And so we have to, I would encourage everybody to think about where your people are coming from, and I like to move forward. So I have to guard myself about being too harsh on people that are hesitant, but I have to remember they're coming from an area of true concern, and I need to encourage them and edify them and let people know that we are working together to glorify and to serve the Lord in all circumstances. And so making sure that you're bringing your congregation along with you and helping them to understand that they need to view this as the church working together to glorify God and to build community. And we shouldn't let any of this that's going on separate or break down our unity within the church. And so we've put a big focus on unity in all that we're doing, so that we are all moving forward together and not leaving anybody behind.
And I think that's such a great point that Mac makes. I think we can't emphasize enough, even though our congregations understand that the pandemic makes us do so many things differently, we still can't emphasize enough how critical it is to make sure that we're walking with others in implementing change rather than being several steps ahead of them. And David, I would also like to share one additional thought from my conversation with Matthew McIntyre at 21st Century Christian that we think is important to mention. Matthew, one of the themes that I know all of us have appreciated is we're grateful that we're beyond extreme lockdown that so many have been in, and we're starting to see reopening of our society. What has 21st Century done to try to help churches think through that?
One of the resources we tried to put together with a lot of help from a lot of people was it's a church reentry roadmap guide, and we've put that on our website just for free download. That you should be able to find it on the front page at 21stcc.com. But what it is, it's a guide for just thinking through how do we start to get back together.
And so I would encourage that our audience visit the 21st Century website. And if you didn't get that when Matthew mentioned it, it's 21stcc.com. So 21stcc.com. And take advantage of those two free resources that Matthew's mentioned, the Church Reentry Roadmap and also the Hybrid Guide to Sunday School. They're free and available for download.
Right, and John, I also wanted to make a quick reminder to everyone that a recording of this webinar is going to be made available on our YouTube channel by the end of this week. We'll also be placing each of the interviews you've heard tonight on our YouTube channel, but in their entirety. So if there's a question that goes unanswered, or you think of a question for a panelist later, you can go to our YouTube page and watch their full interview online. And then, of course, the raw data that we've collected, as you mentioned earlier, and some of the summary data will be made available online as well. And, of course, we'll email everybody when that information becomes available with links to those places, as well as to the 21st Century Christian site as well.
Well, now we're going to bring our panel back and transition to our time for questions and answers. And so while we're bringing the panel online, we're going to show a very short video about studying with Nations University.
Nations University is an online, nonprofit, accredited Christian university that offers affordable and convenient degree programs. It is innovative in its approach and is designed for people who typically have few opportunities for higher education. Nations University offers a Bachelor of Religious Studies degree to help you meet your professional ministry goals. Nations University puts you at the center of your education. The Master of Theological Studies program is designed for those seeking a solid foundation in a theological discipline. The Master of Divinity program is a professional degree intended to prepare one for ministry leadership. Most universities have priced themselves beyond the reach of ordinary persons. At Nations University, tuition is less than $2,000 per year, no matter how many courses you take. This includes your textbooks as well. You can move quickly through the material you already know. That way, you can focus on what you still need to learn. You study on your schedule, not somebody else's. You can receive one-on-one support from student advisors. If you are ready, join thousands of students from over 150 countries across the globe. Nations University. Change your world.
All right, bring everybody back online now. All right, Jim and Tammy.
Right.
You guys are welcome to unmute your microphones if you'd like. I think, unless you have a bird running around that makes a lot of noise like I do, we ought to be in good shape. We've had a couple of questions come in, and I'm going to put those out there and see what how we can address those. And some will be addressed to specifics and others to other people. And for those that are watching, if you still have questions, there's still time to submit those. We're going to wrap up at 8:30 as promised. So if you got questions, get them in. I love how everybody checks their watch at the exact same time. It's almost like those debates for the president. All right, so I'm going to start with the easy ones first. Keith, there was a question about what have you put in that bottom third, besides just the name of your church? Or are there other things that you put in there to help provide people with direction?
Typically, one of the things, if we had several people who came in right before COVID started and people didn't know their names, we changed worship ministers in the middle of COVID. And so we put people's names, we've started trying to put people's names at the bottom. So people who are long-term members get to know them. People who didn't know them before now get to know them. We really haven't given much information other than the church, where we're at, and the names of the people who are standing in front of them, whether they're an elder, they're a deacon, the member's name. We try to identify these people so there's a more understanding of who we're looking at. And so when we talk about people like in a Zoom class, the class will have an idea of who it is.
All right, very good. Yeah, building that familiarity, like you talked about another part of your interview, knowing people by face and name when they get there. Another kind of detailed question came up, and so I'm going to send this over to Tim and Tammy about just mentioning starting out everybody singing together and then dividing out into small groups from there. We're all familiar with everybody on the screen together, but how do you get them from 25, 50, 60, 80, 100 people in a group together off into small groups? Because that's not something we're all familiar with.
Yeah, there's on Zoom you can do breakout groups, and you can either assign those yourself once people join, or you can let those be assigned randomly. And so we would. It's really hard to sing on Zoom because you have to mute your microphone. Or I was sharing with David one time I did not mute, and I got a lot of text reminding me to mute. They didn't want to hear my singing. So, yeah, so the singing part is tough. The large group stuff is not as tough, though, outside of that. And then it was very easy for us to break out. Once you've used the breakout feature, it's very easy and very useful.
Good, yeah. And again, these are features that you may be unfamiliar with. All you got to do is research them a little bit and get good at them. Though Tim obviously has some experience from work, I understand, so he was already familiar with the breakout runs.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. Matt, I have a question for you. it might really go to everybody as well, but since y'all have continued doing a lot of outreach during this time and bringing people to the building and providing food, have you had to deal with fear very much? I mean, among your own members, what are we going to do if we start bringing all these people in? Has that been a problem there? And after he answers, if anybody else has had any concerns about reopening, how have y'all dealt with that? But Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I will say that was definitely a concern in the beginning, especially with our Saturday breakfast and the food boxes, because a lot of the people that come, there's a really large homeless population up here, and there was a strong fear about the transmission of the COVID virus coming from that group of people because of their lack of access to healthcare, and so that was definitely a fear, but I think when we made the adjustments that we had to make, which is giving the food through the door, and when people understood the safety precautions we were taking, they felt more comfortable. And when they saw the impact of and that it was still possible for us to serve our community, people got behind it. But there was definitely some fear at the beginning, for sure. But I think what was most important was to communicate the reason that we're doing it, that we're still the church and we're still taking care of people, we're still serving other people, and we can't allow fear to stop us from doing that. If the church allowed fear to stop them from serving and teaching, then we wouldn't be Christians today, because that would have stopped in the first century. And so once people understood the reason why, and that we were not just doing it unwisely but taking proper precautions, people got on board and supported it.
Anybody else have to deal with the fear aspect in reopening or anything, or was that good?
David, I just wanted to say that we have had to learn to be very respectful for a very large gamut of people who will not leave their house, to people who will just barely put on a mask in a public place. And we've learned to respect and to show respect for that large gamut of people. And it's sometimes trying, sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if we're going to be followers of Christ, we got to be reasonable people. That's what we're called to. And Ephesians 2 and Philippians 4 is to be reasonable people. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to get used to, is that gamut of fear.
I think that's excellent advice. Jason, you had mentioned, and there was a question that came in about people that are adamant about only the church meeting in a building. And when you and Randy were talking, y'all were talking about how we're going to have to get used to this idea of having cell churches and house churches and 4 meetings in order to accommodate social distancing. How have y'all run into that traditional struggles with that traditional view, and how do y'all communicate with everybody that this is just the necessity of this post-pandemic life?
Yeah, we may have had some luxuries that other folks may not have had, and just being large enough to provide some options. One of the things I've been struggling with is being church is meant to be relational and high touch, and yet our society, there are still places for that, but there's also the Netflix world, and there's also the online world, and so how does church become expressed in multiple ways? Church is not defined in a building. Church is not defined by a gathering that's the same gathering of the same people every week. Church is the kingdom of God in our midst, and it's a force, and it's a movement. And so the church must, if we're not thinking about the church being, and the way we're describing it is a 3-pronged vision of a strong digital presence, and we're just barely getting off of home base. We're not even at first base yet, but we need a strong digital presence. 2, we do need to have the gathered people, the gathered church on the Lord's Day. And then 3, are there opportunities not to go plant some big church, but could we reach communities or people? And the phrase is micro churches, but could there be some small gatherings that may reach people that would never come to a church building. So our future planning right now centers on those three expressions of the church.
I'm going to work in a segue, a question that came in earlier that I wasn't sure how I was going to do that, but you may have just partially answered it. And that is, how would this work in a missionary mindset? I mean, can we utilize all this technology that we're doing and all these skills that we're learning to better equip missionaries in the field or even missionaries across the street? But, and this could really go for any of you guys. I mean, is this opening a whole new world for missions as we get better at this? Anybody want to tackle that one? No,
I think the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've learned how easy it is to get online through this process with just the use of an iPhone. We can reach as many people as we can get the message out to. If we can get people a link or let people know that we're online, we can reach many people in our country and all over the world. I mean, we've seen from our analytics that people are watching our stuff all over the world. And if we make this a part of how we train missionaries to work, I mean, we've also connected very well with our local community through online means. And so I think using this for local and foreign missions is just a natural progression of the way online services work.
And I would add to that, there's not just the possibility of reaching people groups, but churches have struggled for years in connecting the local church, that say the one that gathers in Nashville where I serve, with our mission points. And all these new discoveries have been around us for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And I think it's going to be exciting to strengthen the bonds between the mission points and the local church here in the States.
Jason,
we've actually started including our missionaries in some of our elders meetings and church meetings just because we can. They can be a part of our Zoom discussions. We're far more connected with what they're doing than we were before all this started.
I guess a question for both Jason and Matt is, as you all have reached out to missional efforts that you're involved in, have you tried to push some of the learning around technology about streaming and how to stay connected during this time? I know we've all been kind of on a discovery process ourselves related to our own folks that are close to us, but have we been sharing that with some of our missional efforts?
I'll let Matt go, or maybe Keith. Keith kind of, to me, has done a great job in taking the resources that's been right there in front of that church and turning that into a more missional outcomes. I think for us as a church, we're just barely, to be real candid, we're trying to understand what that even means, John. Mm-hmm. So we're still in discovery mode.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's fair for a lot of people to say that there's a lot of people still in discovery mode. This has only been 6 months. I mean, church moves in decade. We move every 10 to 400 years. So to move as fast as we've had to move in the last 6 months, I would think we're all in that kind of mindset right now. Matt, you want to add anything to that?
I was going to say we haven't jumped into teaching mode with that just yet. I mean, we've started including some of our missionaries in our discussions in our Zoom meetings, and we have some of them that are actually participating in our online services, and some of the missionaries and some of the churches are participating. But as far as training them to do that, we haven't jumped into that space just yet, because I'm not sure how easy that will be to do with some of the churches that are in Europe and in Africa. But no, we haven't jumped into training them just yet. We are trying to include them in what we're doing, but not training just yet. But I think that's a great point, something to look into.
Go ahead, Keith, and then I'm going to ask Tim and Tammy a question.
One of the things Jason was speaking to, when I put together a sermon now, I really am thinking about preaching to the unbeliever, preaching to someone who's never heard the story before, preaching as much to the lost as I am the saved, and trying to make sure that I don't take anything for granted, that I don't take any of the references that I make too much for granted, You know, if I'm not careful, I can say, hey, you remember the story of Esther, and make a point. Well, my audience may not know anything about Esther. And so as I have moved online, I have really started trying to think through not making assumptions about who my listeners are and their level of understanding, while still trying, and the other side of that is still trying to get at some really deep truths of Christianity and making those applications at the same time.
And Tim and Tammy, I know y'all have used y'all are a missional church. Y'all are a church plant, and so y'all have had that connection with the main Landmark Church, and y'all had the technology, you had the sermons piped in, and you were going through that process, and you have, since this began, decided to disconnect, if you will, unplug, and do everything in-house, even Zoom or not, but doing it all in-house. So kind of addresses this question is, how do y'all feel about, the spreading ourselves out technologically? Does that have some downsides?
Yeah, it's interesting listening to the conversation, because our approach has been very opposite of what we have gone away from technology and simplified ourselves. We are meeting in a park, and that may mean we get a pavilion one week and the next week we don't. We've been fairly fortunate that we've gotten pavilions all but this past week we had to move. So we're very fluid, and we're in the same park, just maybe a different location. But we went to Discovery Bible Studies as our message, as our story. We would use the stories, and when I hear what everybody's doing, I'm amazed at you're able to do that, I guess, because the churches are much larger than ours. We've kind of simplified ourselves. We have gone away from technology. We don't even have microphones.
I don't think you need one. But y'all still use Zoom like on Wednesday, to kind of supplement your regular activities, right? Y'all, it's not your primary, but it does serve to help keep people connected during the week.
Yes, Zoom is our training things during the week, where we're teaching discipleship and things like that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I had a specific question about the youth and children, but I was wondering from Kenneth and Stephen, and this will be our last question, I think, that we'll be able to tackle, is as the kids are starting to return, you talked about still using this technology for evangelistic reasons and to train them. Just curious how y'all plan to do that. I know we have a lot of people that have kind of struggled with the youth and children stuff. How do y'all see this advancing? Okay, great. Now we got this wonderful technology. How do y'all see using it, say, in the next, 6 months to 6 years even?
Dave, that's a good question. What we have been doing over the last couple of weeks, we started October the 4th with a modified children's class on Sunday morning, where we have a few younger classes. And then from 3-year-old all the way up to about 5th grade, they're meeting in the fellowship hall, which is wide enough for them to socially distance. And we have a skit that we have pre-recorded with puppets that our teenagers have actually put on. So one of our elders' wives wrote a bunch of skits over the pandemic. And so we've had teenagers come up here, use the stage that's behind us, and we just recorded a couple puppet skits, and we're playing those on Sunday morning for them. So we're using it for that. We've talked, Stephen and I, we have a whiteboard in his office, talked about how we can utilize different avenues with this video content to be able to encourage, make announcements, a couple silly things. You saw us with the puppets, some silly things that we try to do to try to encourage, uplift, and try to, reach out into the community the best as we can. So that's one way we're using it. Steve, you want to?
And what we noticed with the kids
starting to take part in some of the videos that we put on, trying to get them more comfortable just in speaking roles. Because as they start to evangelize more, being comfortable with speaking, you know, especially about any kind of material that we're talking about, it's exactly what we were trying to do even pre-pandemic. You know, get some of the young men behind the pulpit, get them comfortable with public speaking. You know, it just happens we can try to get them to start with a puppet and create videos. And to Kenneth's point, looking at trying to expand something that even they can get excited about and show their friends. You know, we were talking about it earlier in the interviews. Any of the stuff that the kids can get excited about, you know, especially when it comes to social media, trying to engage them in that. That's, as the kids probably say still, that's their bag. That's what they like to do. So anything that they can get excited about, that's where we want to try to hit that niche.
I think that's an excellent advice. If they can get excited, they can do great things. So I appreciate that. John, you want to wrap this up for us?
Sure. I really appreciate everyone joining us for this conversation, really, that we've been having for the last 90 minutes. And we've reached, unfortunately, the end of our time together. We're going to be posting this whole webinar so that it can be accessed later, and we'll communicate how to do that through our Nations University website, as well as by email to those of you who've joined us or signed up to join us. But thank you for again, to the congregations that have responded to our survey, for the information that you've shared. We're going to try to present that in a way that's helpful to others. Thank you to our panelists. We really appreciate your roles and your engagement in just being generous with your time, sharing ideas, being willing to be on video. Not everybody's willing to do that, but thank you for allowing us to take your images and your thoughts and share them with others. And thanks for being with us tonight for this panel discussion. I appreciate the Nations University team. Thank you to the Christian Chronicle, 21st Century, to Mission Alive, and the other groups that have helped share the word about our webinar tonight. That means a great deal to all of us. All of us want to see the church grow. All of us want to see God's kingdom advance. And we're grateful that all of you have a heart around that. So with that, we'll go ahead and close things off for tonight. We truly appreciate everybody being part of this effort. Thank you.
Thank you all.